This is A World on Purpose.
A purposeful life is the most important kind and the most valuable kind of life.
Every choice that we make makes a difference, for better or worse.
I loved walking in a village and seeing the before and after.
This is the podcast dedicated to those humans choosing to live larger by working for the greater good. And these are their stories. Stories of hope and of true change that come from living on purpose.
What if you were to suddenly say there are no challenges, there are only opportunities?
Regardless of where you come from, your financial identity shouldn't determine where you end up in life.
I'm your host, Alyssa Fisher-Harris, and my hope is that my inspiring guests will take you on an introspective journey that helps you tap into your own pivot to purpose, bringing greater meaning to your life. Welcome to A World on Purpose. Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning back into A World on Purpose with me, your host, Alyssa Fisher-Harris. And I am awesomely excited today to bring you my awesome guest. You're going to learn all about him in this interview today. Mr. Sasha Strauss, he's the CEO and founder of a very cool branding strategy company based in LA called Innovation Protocol. And his story is really unique. I met Sasha many years ago when I saw him speak for the first time. I think it was back in possibly 2015. And I was just I can't even explain how blown away I was by him. He's so dynamic, so charismatic, and so passionate about talking about brand and why it's important to have a very genuine brand message, and why it's important for brands to care about something and actually take a stand and not have it just be part of this thing that I call good washing. Like really, truly, genuinely get behind something, create meaning, putting meaning into their brand ethos, into their messaging, into their products. And so that's how I got to know him. And I just absolutely fell in love with the guy and everything he stood for, and watched him over the years grow this incredible company that has helped really shift and change the way brands think about their business. Here at A World on Purpose, we like to talk about purpose and how we want to take a step into purpose, something that not just brings greater meaning to our life, but can also do something for the greater good. And Sasha and his company, 15 years strong now, 25 employees, worked with multiple, Fortune 100s, faith-based organizations, a bunch of different things. They are the ones who show people how to do that. And from a very genuine standpoint too, again, not this like good washing concept that has been, kind of something that's happened in the past. In the interview, we're going to touch on, just his life story and what got him here, and how growing up with a family of service like really instilled in him the idea of what it means to live in a world on purpose. And also just like his own challenges as a young child that made him this very vulnerable and open person, and made him realize that, oh my God, I'm susceptible to like brand messaging, when he learned that very young. And that actually pivoted him into wanting to do this as a career. Just as an idea, his career has taken him everywhere. I mean, this guy has TED Talks all over the place. You're going to want to go see him. You're going to want to watch him. He's got the most awesome drawings. He doesn't do typical PowerPoints with just bullets. I mean, it's like looking at a Candyland picture, that just you get lost in. It's incredible. And it actually helps communicate the message of the speech. But just to give you some idea how awesome he is, I mean, his consulting company has taken him 1 million miles flown around as a brand consultant, is an equivalent to 100,000 butts and seats in international speeches, 10,000 hours teaching grad school, 1,000 live concert shows, 100 favorite albums that he's had, 10 pairs of boots, and one way of kindness, as he likes to put it, which I love. And he sent me this in a very cool way of all of his little emojis that describe everything that he's about, which if you're watching the video, you can see it here, which I love so much. So I really hope you enjoy this show. Even if you're not a person who works in a company who cares about brand, is in communications or whatever, you'll find it really interesting to understand actually what drives you in your buying decisions, and how you might be thinking about empowering yourself through picking companies that are taking a stand and really representing purpose in their mission and their ethos. So without further ado, please join me for Mr. Sasha Strauss. Good day, good evening, good afternoon, everyone, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for coming back to A World on Purpose with me, your ever exciting and enthusiastic host, Alyssa Fisher-Harris, who loves to bring you all these amazing tales that I like to weave all around purpose. And today I say this all the time, so if it gets old, sorry, forgive me, But I really do get super, super jazzed and excited about all these amazing guests that I get to bring forward to you every week, which is super cool. And today I am bringing to you, honest to God and truly, this is one of the most dynamic humans I think I've ever had the pleasure of meeting on the face of planet Earth. One of the most dynamic speakers that I've ever seen in my life. And you're going to be wowed by him today. He is extraordinary. And my guest today is Sasha Strauss, who's founder and CEO of a really cool branding strategy consulting firm based in Los Angeles called Innovation Protocol. And they have been around for 15 years. They have 25 employees, and they've worked with a ton of Fortune 100 companies, small businesses, faith-based organizations, academic institutions, startups, and also woven deeply into their ethos, which we're going to get into, of how you can do this with your own business as well, is always doing 10% of their work for nonprofits. So without further ado, because I'm not going to give you too much details about my guest, I'm going to let him tell you in his own enigmatic words, is my guest today, Mr. Sasha Strauss. Sasha, welcome to A World on Purpose.
You're too kind. I'm so happy to be here. I'm humbled because the rest of the guests you've had outshine me with such bright light. I'm just lucky to be here.
Oh, that's not true. They all have bright lights, and thank you for saying that, but everyone has their own unique bright light, right?
Fair. I'll take it. All right.
You take it. Yeah.
Let's see what we can burn.
No, we're going to burn some awesome stuff today. So, you know what the show's about, right?
Oh, for sure.
And
well,
obviously,
I know you and I know what you're about. So
thank you. Well, I live to shine the light on other human beings that are doing extraordinary work that really have taken this path to purpose. I call this pivot to purpose, like leading with the idea of intentionally living in a world on purpose, weaving purpose and impact into your life, your everyday life, your relationships, and also your business. And that's really your area of expertise. But before we get into Innovation Protocol and all the awesome stuff you've done around branding, and super excited for you to share for brands like how they can weave purpose into their business,
sure.
I would love for you to just share your story. Like, who is Sasha Strauss and how did you get here?
It's not an interesting story, but I'll answer the question because it'll make the interview work well. My father is an orthopedic surgeon, so bones, muscles, and joints. And before the era of HIPAA and patient privacy, I was allowed to go everywhere with him in the surgeries, in the emergency room, in the hospitals, no matter where we were in the world. Also, my father was in the U.S. Navy. He was a captain physician in the Navy. And so whether we were in Thailand or Spain or you name the place, I got to experience other cultures in these desperate situations. And it really created this sense of like international citizenship in my mind, because when you're in the hospital, everyone's the same. There isn't a they or us. And one thing that was really interesting about the way that my father worked is that he didn't think twice about bringing me to work. And this was a long time ago. So the idea that, this this youth is sort of fumbling around with his father in all these special places. I mean, when I was putting on casts for Navy SEALs, the Navy SEALs didn't ask me like, you're 12. Why are you doing this? They were like, oh, Captain Strauss, okay, fine. This is the duty.
Oh, wow.
And yeah. And what's sort of funny about it is I didn't know that was strange. I didn't understand that child coming with parent to work was novel, especially because my mom, who's a pharmacist, also brought me to work. So whether I was at my dad's hospital or my mom's pharmacy clinic, we were on the floor doing our homework, playing games, or doing work in the lab or in the hospital. And it just felt very normal. One example is that the school bus would drop me off, not at home, but at my dad's hospital, where we ate most of our meals, did most of our family events at the hospital where my father worked every day and still works to this day. And so I put that all out there because eventually when I built a business, I wanted a lot of those things that were a part of my growing up to be a part of how I ran my business, but I wasn't clear about it. I didn't realize that every time I said to my coworkers, your family's in town, you've got to have them come to work. Like, we'll make a special event. We'll bring food, and they're like, you're a weird boss, but okay, And I was like, you know what? Fine. I'll give you a day off. If your family is in town, if they come to the office, you get an extra day off.
Wow.
And so, eventually that became part of the culture where I didn't even need to incentivize them to do it. And, only later in life that I realized, like, oh, Sasha, that's because you went to work and it was a part of who you are. And my point in all of this is that, I know as I described my mom and my dad's work, you notice that I implied that they enjoyed it. They enjoy it. They enjoyed it. They're proud of it. And I felt that. So when I built my company and built my career, not only did I want to make it a place for family, but I also wanted to love it. And so that was a defining characteristic of all my professional pursuits.
Wow. I love that. I think, it's interesting. I've had several people come on the show who've had the influence of the service, whether they've been a service member or their parent has. And I find an interesting theme there that I'd love to tap into a little bit if it's okay, because I'm getting, even the word being in the service,
Right.
you are of service to humanity. And so I'm curious, you chose a really interesting career path around branding, and specifically, we'll get into it a little later, tying purpose and impact into your branding strategy. So how could you describe a little bit like being able to be in those moments and seeing what your folks did and traveling the world and cultural places? Like how did purpose affect you? How did you see being of service to influence where you are now?
Yeah, it humbles me to be able to talk about it, because we never talked about it. We just did it. We just did it. When my father was called to Haiti after the incredible destruction, he didn't like talk about it with our friends or like, make a big shtick. He was just like, this is the duty, or when there was an earthquake in Turkey and my father's like in the middle of the desert, in a tent repairing people who had been damaged in those building collapses. There was no like, this is what you do, there was not, it was just like, oh yeah, I'm going to go into Turkey. Okay, Sasha, you're going to be fine. Your grandmother's going to be in town. Okay, great. You're all situated. I'm going to Turkey. And so I think because it was just so synonymous with how we lived that it never, when I started working at 18 and started doing nonprofit work while I did for-profit work, again, it didn't feel strange. It felt natural, kind of like having my children come to work. It just felt natural because that was the way that I was raised. And again, not until later in life did I understand that no, often service is described as something that you have to do because your religion tells you to do it, or you're later in life and you've lived, so you have to give back then. There was no start and stop. It was a part of who we always were, and we never talked about it.
Interesting. So it was just like deeply ingrained. It was just part of your DNA.
Well, for example, when we were in other countries and my father was playing a role inside the Navy as a physician, it was just, we were in other countries who believed different things, who lived different lives, and we never had an ugly American view on it. Like, oh, that's different. It was like, do you understand how cool this is to be able to be in this country doing these rituals with these people? And it just made it clear to me that we are one kind of human and we're all the same, and that it doesn't matter how you look or where you come from or who you pray to. We can collaborate. We can help save lives together. We can build infrastructure. We can protect each other, and, call that service. I don't know what the right word to describe it is, but yes, so present in how I was raised that it is indelible in how I live.
Well, obviously, because you've done so much work and you're pretty extraordinary. I don't know how you do all of this and have a family. It's amazing to me. You're a faculty member at multiple universities. So you teach, in addition to running and founding a very successful branding agency. And, since we talk about purpose and the idea of it, for you, it was ingrained. For you, it was part of your DNA. It's wonderful. It wasn't some like aha moment or what I call this pivot to purpose necessarily, it sounds like. But when you're thinking about other people who might be feeling like maybe they're lacking some meaning in their life, et cetera, and especially when it comes to business, let's get into Innovation Protocol now. Like, how did you decide to get into branding, number one? And number two, when did you decide? Because I've seen your speeches. You've done some incredible speeches. And for anyone who has never seen a Sasha Strauss speech, find him on YouTube, find his TED Talk. He's got the most amazing, incredible artwork as well. I mean, the artwork that you put in your speeches it's outstanding. It's like this mind-blowing, smorgasbord of visual stimulation that helps explain your point, which is so cool. But what was it about branding and then getting purpose and impact, kind of woven into the idea of getting companies to care about things? How did that start for you?
Well, what I didn't mention about my youth was that despite my parents having me at work on the regular, at school I was an outcast because in the 1980s, if you had severe attention deficit disorder, you were in special education. And so I grew up in special ed, special buses, special classrooms, special teachers.
Wow.
And so why was I in special ed? One, I was that energy that you mentioned in my speeches, I used to get in trouble for, but now I sell it, So,
great.
That was part of it. But being in special ed and being around all types of people, I started to get a sense of my sensitivities and why I was so disrupted in class, or why when I watched television, it was just the most overwhelming experience, was because I'm a believer. I believe in you until proven otherwise. And so you can imagine when you're 7 and you're watching a commercial and you believe like I believe, wow, that thing you crave. You're just like, oh my gosh, I'm going to drive that car to create this lifestyle to achieve that goal. And, when you're 7, fine, but when you're 16, 17 and you're making life choices because of those campaigns, I finally realized that I'm being impacted. I'm taking action. I'm choosing things because of these incredibly well communicated ideas. I was shocked to realize that, oh my gosh, this is being done to me. The reason why I want to drive that car is someone calculated what someone within my profile would want, and then they put it out there and I bit. And you can imagine that when you're 17, you're 18, you're in the midst of your rebelliousness, you're kind of like pushing against everything, pushing against your family, against your religion, against your community. I got to a point where I was like, how are these organizations and individuals controlling me? They're controlling me with their voice, and they're not doing it by accident. They're doing it intentionally. In fact, many of them have selected keywords and used particular actions to get me to do something. And whether they were trying to get me to do something good or bad, the big shock to me at 18 was, Sasha, you better protect yourself. You are extremely vulnerable. Remember, I gave everyone the benefit of the doubt. I believed even if there wasn't a reason. And so whether those were the bullies in middle school or high school or otherwise who didn't like who I was or what was wrong with me, even as they were inflicting their action, I still believed that they did not know what they were doing, and it wasn't against me. Something was going on in their world that got them to act out like that. So anyway, that sensitivity, that emotional sensitivity and the attention deficit disorder put me in a predicament that I needed to protect myself from, because you can imagine every song I listened to, every event I attended, I was like, I am in, I believe, yes. And so
I'm like that too, by the way, just so you know.
Okay, well, welcome to the branding business.
Yeah, you get burned a couple times, but it's okay. You know.
Yeah, that's it. That's exactly. I got burned a couple times. And so I needed to know, how were these messages made? And from that day on, at 18 and a half, I've only worked in communications. I went to go work for advertising firms that put together the ads that convinced me I wanted certain cars. I went to go work for the nonprofits that convinced me to volunteer. And I was like, how did you do that? And so by going and seeing how these connections were created, I got to become somewhat of a subject matter expert. After 1 year, 3 years, 7 years, 10 years, 20 years of watching these organizations communicate and orchestrate their voice, you inevitably, by exposure alone, become attuned to it, and eventually maybe can be good at making those answers. Full circle. Part of my sensitivity is that I cannot work for organizations I don't believe in. And, that's hard because everyone's got their issues. All organizations have their challenges. All leaders have their imperfections. And I have found solace in realizing that even those that are not functioning the way that I want them to, I can make them better. I can't help them care more. And the simplest example is that when I'm building a brand for a global organization with thousands of people, what can I really do? Yes, we can clean up their voice and make sure they're in the right places and have the right visuals. But what I care about and what drives me in my work for them is that I know that if their employees know and like where they work more, they'll be kinder to their kids at home at night. If work is good to you or you believe in your work, you're better to your family, you're better to your community. So even for businesses where I don't particularly like their approach to that market, I reconcile that but these tens of thousands of people want to care about what they do and why they do it. And I want to be the one that helps them find it.
That's so wonderful. I love that too, because you're taking a branding approach, not just from the outside mechanism, from the consumer side that sees the brand. You're doing it from the inside too, which I think is often missed in branding. Don't you think?
It is the most neglected, but I'll tell you, it's 51% of the balance. In fact, I do this. I sort of toggle my new clients by sort of saying to them, okay, I know your work, you want to engage a brand strategy firm. You want to go through all these stages in order to launch these products or engage these new audiences. But let me just tell you, whatever you thought that just costs, whatever that price was to do that work, secondarily, you need that same amount of money to roll it out to your workforce and help them understand where it came from, give them the tools to implement it, give them the reason to believe, to care about it. And that is going to pay more dividends than any language architecture I could possibly render.
Right. So I remember you many years ago, God, I want to say like 2015.
Don't age me.
Hey, I'm probably older than you. So, but I think it was like 2015, you were giving a speech that I saw, and you were talking about that. And I want to do this first, but then I want to break down a little bit for people who don't know what branding actually is. Okay. And what like intrinsic steps are to help a brand have that great brand identity, step into purpose, all that stuff. But to touch on this employee thing, I remember you talking about, this was kind of like at the sort of like the height of when all these brands started getting into the cause marketing, situation. And what did that mean? So we're going to do all these initiatives that are going to show our consumers that we care, and it's going to, translate to retail sales, and we're going to sell more product because we're just taking a stand. But I remember you specifically saying, if you are not thinking about your employees as your greatest advocates, that is, you're exponentially losing revenue and you're not penetrating the market the way you could. You want to talk about that a little bit, just based on sort of what you said earlier?
Yes. And I remember that talk that you're describing. And what I was pushing on there was any money that you would spend externally, buying media, doing social media, attending a trade show, et cetera, the chances of you converting an audience to believe, to buy, to invest, to donate are very slim. I mean, even for the best of outreachers, the best of salespeople. But what we forget every day is that our employees are the ones talking to our customers every day. Even if they're pursuing invoices, they're still having dialogues with our buyers. Those employees are also in social media talking about their work, which inevitably makes them recruiters or not recruiters. And so what I really try to help businesses understand is that if you can get your employees to care deeply, to understand the idea's origins, and to be able to communicate them effectively, you have, as you mentioned, an exponential catalyst, a whole army of people who every single day are pushing your brand forward, advancing it, protecting it, retaining its audiences, bringing talent to the table. I mean, I don't know how much that costs, but there isn't a number that can afford you that much advocacy. And that's why the employee investment is such an integral part of any good brand strategy, whether you're a nonprofit, a religion, an academic institution, a corporation, you name it.
Great. Yeah, I appreciate that, because I think things are changing now that people are starting to recognize that, especially with COVID and all these things that are happening with employees around the world. So that's good. But let's break it down a little bit then into like, I'm a company. I am starting, let's say I'm an emerging company, or maybe an existing company, and we need to do a rebrand. Explain what branding is, what that process is like, and then we'll get into the purpose side of it.
Well, maybe I'll take your words and I'll add an RE, rebrand, revise. Often the brand exists. Even if you're a startup, it has an ethos, it has a message, it has an outreach. And so most of the branding work that goes on in the world is revisionary, rebranding, relaunching, things like that. And let me just frame where brand strategy sits in the spectrum of communication so you'll understand the fundamentals of it, which is that your audience, people only buy, they only donate to, they only work for organizations that they know exist.
Mm-hmm.
That's painful, but true. Okay. So we have a duty to be known, to speak up, to find audience. And so how do we do that? The three classic mechanisms are to advertise. So think about advertisements as short and pithy and regular. You see them over and over and over again. You're tired of those advertisements, or you're tired of hearing those advertisements. Mm-hmm. That's because it's really the introductory behavior. The, hey, we exist. Hey, we exist. Hey, we exist. And it's annoying, but inevitably 1 out of 1,000 people who sees that outreach is be like, oh, I am hungry for one of those things, or I'm looking for a nonprofit to partner with. Great. Well, once you have somebody clicking on you, engaging your content, you recognize you owe them the duty to explain yourself. If introductory behavior was, hi, I exist. Okay, now let me tell you more. And that's why marketing, classically, websites, brochures, videos, it's got more content, right? There's more to be ingested, right? Because that's in the second phase, the explanation phase. So if advertising introduces and marketing explains, then inevitably public relations, employee relations, community relations, that's where the engagement takes place. That's where you've earned the audience and they're listening and dialogue and connecting. My only point in explaining advertising, marketing, and public relations is to suggest that if they are incongruent, if they don't harmonize, integrate, well, then you're freaking me out, because like over here, you're a circle, and over there, you're a triangle, and I don't know what you are. And so what brand strategy is at the base is the fundamental definition of who we are, why we matter, how we're different, why it suggests that our products mean something to you, all of that language and architecture, so that when I introduce you or explain to you or engage you, there's coherence. That process of defining that brand strategy is most defined by the word strategy, not brand. We know that the output is an identity or a refreshed identity, but how do you get there? I promise, Scouts Honor, forever, you cannot make it up. I mean, honestly, it's like imagine wearing a Halloween costume every day. That's what it means to make up a brand. Mm-hmm. And you just can't. Eventually, your people are going to see through your makeup. Mm-hmm. So what brand strategy is specifically about is the stages of work that led up to the answer, less the answer. What are those stages? Well, the obvious stages would be, all right, well, who are we competing with? And not in judgment, but in peer challenge, like who else is encroaching on our audience's consciousness? And what can we learn from their best practices? Well, in 2021, it's very easy to be aware of your competitors. You Google them, you follow them, you listen to them, you watch them, and you learn what they have to say. Mm-hmm. That's incredible market data that 20 years ago would have cost you $1 million to acquire. Mm-hmm. So there's a competitive research phase. There's also obviously a phase where you're interviewing leaders internally, externally, and you're getting a sense of the lay of the land. Well, what I would tag with that piece is interviews for the sake of interviews are not going to give you your brand answer. Okay, so everyone thinks we're just going to go interview people and they're going to give us that thing that calls. No, the interviews are specifically to build advocates so that when you do roll out the brand, there's a whole community of people who are engaged in the process and are looking forward to the output. Okay, yeah, so it's often considered like, oh, we do these interviews to get insights, and yeah, some stuff comes up, but it's not like the incredible shock. It's like, oh, this makes sense. And what are you doing? Why are you talking to those internal stakeholders, external stakeholders, partners, students, et cetera? So that when the brand rolls out, there's a whole group of people who are like, I saw that, I know that, oh my gosh. And otherwise you've got a whole bunch of people who said, why did you change something?
Right.
Right. That's going to be the loudest voice. So just to add another milestone, if we're doing competitive analysis and audience engagement, you get a sense of like what we can learn about what's going on. There's absolutely a responsibility to understand where the product or service fits in the life of the audience. And so it sounds crazy, but going to where the product is sold, experiencing that sales experience. So if you're a software company selling $1 million software to enterprises, well, where does that whole transaction take place? Oh, it's happening in conference rooms on PowerPoints. Oh, it's happening at a trade show. That observation of that channel is integral to your answer. Because if you build your answer and it fits this way, but the market functions this way, you've wasted all that time and energy. And so understanding that market's function is another key stage in the process of building a brand strategy.
That's great. And also, I mean, it's so important what you pointed out too, because so many companies do have all their departments, not even just marketing, communications, and branding, but operating in silos. And that's just ineffective across the board.
Oh, yeah. Part of brand strategy, by the way, just to add to what you're suggesting, is that brand strategy is this beautiful chocolate coating that takes any corporate initiative and just lets it naturally float between business units. You know, chief operating officer's department, why are they excited about a brand? Oh, wow, everyone's going to be more efficient and more integrated. I like, chief sales officer, we're going to have the most relevant tools. We're going to know what our competitors are saying. Me like, everybody gets HR. HR's like, totally. Oh, you're going to help me retain employees and recruit new ones? I'm in. Yeah. I don't have another corporate initiative that warrants that much leadership engagement. I can't give you another initiative like, hey, we're doing new IT infrastructure. CHRO's out, CSO is out, So brand is kind of incredible that it really can cross those silos.
Yeah, how fun. And so let's talk a little bit about, thank you for breaking that down for people. I'm sure most people who are in business and in those positions understand it, but for those who don't, and might be thinking about something that they're working on, it would be good for them to understand that process. So let's go a step further now. Let's get into innovation protocol specifically and some of the brands you've worked with. And because we're here to talk about purpose and impact, how many of your brands have come to you with the notion of, we want to take a stand and have something more meaningful in our messaging, and we want it to be real, not what I call good washing. And from that standpoint, how important is that for a brand to say, now we need to take a stand and we need to mean it?
It's extremely important, maybe the most important thing a brand can do, but only 1 out of 10 rings our doorbell saying, hey, we need this.
Wow.
Yeah. Most organizations that ring our doorbell, again, nonprofit, for-profit, doesn't matter. They've got an acute business issue. They're trying to solve for a market displacement, for a flight of talent. They're not there to say, hey, help us define how we save the world. Now, of course, 1 out of 10 does, and we build long-term answers to those questions. But to really help you and your audience, this is something we have to bring up. This is something we have to light the light of and never let go out. And every single time we deliver an answer, we always embed a little bit of, and this is how this may ultimately help you impact the world in a way that I can care. And so that when we deliver the end of the program and we're putting a lot of emphasis on what is our social responsibility, it's not new or foreign to them. They're tired of hearing about it from us.
Interesting. How is it hard for you to broach a brand and say, hey, your brand could be very much more effective in boosting your ROI, et cetera, if you did weave in some... Yeah,
we end up rationalizing, we're business consultants. So we end up helping them understand that good social responsibility action is good for business. I'll give you an example. Your employees, no matter how good of a company you are, no matter how true and sound your finances, no matter how sweet your leaders are, if you're only making money, your employees have a very hard time staying motivated. Okay. They find they're getting their bills paid, but for who and why, they need an answer to that question. And so social responsibility is good for employee retention. Okay. First. Second is that, when you're out pitching and talking about your work, it's very hard to say, oh, you're big company number 1. Well, let me tell you about big company number 3 that we did this exact same work for. It's weird. Okay. But when you say, all right, big company 1, you're having these 3 challenges. Let me talk to you about a nonprofit that had the same challenges and help you understand how they dealt with them with brand strategy. It's one of those non-confrontational case study peer examples that never make the audience feel off-put or like they're an also-ran. They feel special because the example that you're using is someone who doesn't have resource, someone who doesn't have time. And so that's really compelling and good for business. It helps drive sales. And then the third thing is that ultimately people are going to call you into question. You're going to make mistakes. Your business is going to trip a wire. A talent is going to be confrontational. And you don't want to then and only then be an organization people care for. You want to be an organization that people care for so that when you trip a wire, people protect you.
Right. I think that's a really good point. You don't want to have it to be... putting a fire out suddenly and now, oops, we should care about something. right? I think that's a really good point. And that's happened with quite a few brands. Like,
oh yeah, it's
trying to
it's
dig
a
themselves.
shame.
Yeah. Yeah. I would love an example, if you have one, of a brand that came to you for a rebrand that you were able to talk to them about how the importance of having social responsibility and what the outcomes were. Like, what happened?
Okay. Let me give you one that I think is probably shocking. So this is a hospital system, big healthcare system, you know, and you think healthcare, I mean, isn't that caring for other people? The word care is in the name, you know. Does it need social responsibility? And, you know, healthcare is expensive, it's scary, it's big, it's profitable, you know, it's a big industry in the United States. And so this healthcare system, which was growing and becoming a nationally renowned system, eventually people started to ask, okay, I know we save lives for a living, but like, what are we doing to even prevent people from even coming into the hospital? Like, what do we, okay? So this is a really fun turn of events. We're talking to the CEO about this duty, like, hey, beyond saving lives for income, what are we doing to prevent those lives from even showing up? And this leader really had to do an introspective journey. And it's so funny how this came out. We were scheduled to have a meeting. It was a big meeting. We all flew to the office. We're sitting in this massive conference room. And when I say a massive conference room, you'd have a hard time throwing a ball across it. And we're waiting for the CEO to come in. And we're all sitting at one end of the table, ready. And then the CEO comes in at the other end and is all famished. You know, it's like all over the place and apologetic. Like, oh, I'm so sorry. Excuse me, folks. And please excuse my outfit. And what was the CEO wearing? Flannel shirt, leather vest, leather belt, cowboy pants, cowboy boots with mud on them.
Oh my God.
You know, yeah. And so we're sitting there and we're like, okay, we're not going anywhere. You got to tell us about this. And so what did the CEO talk about? Well, how they and their children have a little farm in the backyard and they till the soil and plant the crops and care for the livestock and know the livestock and create a ritual around the livestock. And we're like, well, why? You know, what is this all about? And the CEO's answer was something like, well, I think health comes from caring for the whole person. And it can't just be, you've got this wound, what's the best medical treatment? It's, what can I do to help ensure that you don't get those wounds? And the answer often is whole person health, as in psychological health, food stuff. And so what did the CSR program for this healthcare system become? It became fighting food deserts, where there are no healthy fruits and vegetables in the retail footprint in these remote towns. And, you know, we laugh about America because we think we're all about our big cities. We're not. We're thousands of small cities where you basically only have fast food and donuts. And so what is this healthcare system doing? What is their CSR initiative? Their CSR initiative is driving healthy living into these remote communities through whole person care, starting with healthy foods and ensuring that food deserts don't exist in their markets. And you've got to give them a respect for that. You got to be like, wow, if this works, you're actually going to lose money. You're going to have less patients because they won't have all these debilitating diseases. And the point is, well, you can talk about this. You can talk about this, and that will build awareness and bring more people to your property. And more importantly, make your employees incredibly proud to work for you.
Wow. That's such an awesome example. And I love it too, because that's counterintuitive, you would think, for a healthcare company to say, we want to have less people coming. But the truth is, it goes back to that whole thing you've always talked about too, is brand loyalty. Those people, if they do get sick, where are they going to go?
They're never going to go anywhere else.
They're never going to go anywhere else. Yeah. So,
you know, it's fun that you're bringing this up, because I'll give you a counter example, an example where they weren't so liberal about it and willing to like do this work.
Yeah.
So let me start by saying, when people ask me what CSR, what should I do? My only answer ever is, well, what do you charge the most for? Okay, well, that's what you have to do with your CSR. So at Innovation Protocol, we charge the most for brand strategy. We don't lift boxes. We don't put grocery bags together. What do? We do brand strategy for the organizations that do. Okay, so what I give you this example, I was at a CEO summit, and this is some powerful CEOs, and I'm like preaching like I preach. And one of the CEOs is like, Sasha, get off the stage. You know, what are you talking about? Like, we're the jet engine repair people. You know, when you go to the airport, there's 2 airplanes, there's a Boeing and an Airbus. Guess what? They don't make their engines. Siemens and all these other folks, they make their engines, and they need us to be the service techs on them. You know, I was like, whoa, oh my gosh, it's amazing. And he's like, so your whole nonsense about social responsibility, we're wrenching engineers on jet engines. Like, what do I have? You know, and I was like, I promise you there's an answer. I promise you there's an answer that will make you cry when you say it. And so he was like, okay, get this nonsense out of here. I see the CEO at a conference a year later, comes up, super giddy. It's like, Sasha, remember me? I was the one who told you, you know. And I was like, yeah, of course I remember. I was like, tell me about jet engines. Tell me about your wrenching on jet engines. And he's like, you won't believe this. We wrench on maybe 10,000 airplanes a year. But guess what? 5 of them we don't charge for. And it turns out they're the Doctors Without Borders airplanes.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
So who are we, Sasha? Who are we as a jet engine repair company? First and foremost, we're the people who repair the jet engines for Doctors Without Borders.
Wow. That's awesome.
And you can imagine how inspiring that is to their wrenchers when they go home and their kid asks, hey, what did you do today, Mom?
Yeah.
And Mom was like, I work for the company that enables doctors to go to distant lands to save people who can't afford what we offer. And it's amazing.
Wow. That gives me chills when you tell that. And it's so great, Sasha, too, because the way you approach your work, which I love about you, is you don't force your thoughts on people. You let it sit and digest. And like a year later that came up and the guy didn't even hire you, but you made impact on his thought process, which I love. You must have been so like proud, not proud even, but just like pleased that exponentially sort of that ripple effect happened even without you having to work with him.
Yeah, I'm too sensitive of a person. So I just try to give. And I know that eventually things will bite and come around. And if 10 people that I've given to, one of them comes around and says yes, then all that effort was worth it. And that's how I keep myself sane.
Oh my gosh, that's so awesome. Let's talk a little bit. Thank you for sharing that. Those are 2 really, really exceptional examples. And I love that because I think there is an innate fear sometimes. You know, I've been in branding, marketing, communications too in my career, my whole life, and everything crazy. Sales management, I've done pretty much all of it. This weird trajectory of like an Etch-a-Sketch instead of a linear progression. And I have seen a lot of, at first, in the very early days of the cause marketing, it was some of these, you know, exceptional brands that really stood out. Like I'm going to use your example of the healthcare, that counterintuitiveness. Patagonia was a huge example, obviously, right? I mean, don't buy this jacket was one of those genius, right? And then slowly brands started seeing, maybe there's something to this. Like not only does it make a difference in the world, it helps our ROI, it helps our employees. But what about the leadership? Because let's talk about leadership. If they don't step into it and become advocates for it also, then doesn't it kind of fall short, even if you're doing brand strategy for the company?
I would elevate and argue that it's the only thing we want to hear from the leaders. Honestly, I know that it's their job to tell us about products and features and functions and planning and strategy and everything else. But what is it we want the airtime to be about? How this organization is impacting the world. My extreme example of this is at the Consumer Electronics Show, CES, this year, 2021, it was virtual. And I watched all of the keynote speeches because you just got to see what do these world's biggest companies have to say when they've got the loudest mic to the widest array of audiences.
Right.
And I'll tell you, you got to go watch all the videos. What did everyone, Verizon, General Motors, Samsung, Best Buy, what did they all spend almost all of their airtime talking about?
What?
This. What good are we doing for the world? What did Verizon talk about? Verizon only spoke. I mean, it's amazing. They've got a very eccentric CEO. He's bombastic and wearing a t-shirt, you know. And what is he talking about? He's talking about how Verizon provides the telecom for the first responders so that they can do their work. And you're just like, all right, I'm in. And he spent the entire 1-hour broadcast talking only about that. All right, General Motors, what are they talking about? They're talking about the electric future, their new automobile systems that are going to help manage, you know, pollution and everything else. It's like, oh, okay, that, right? Go down the line. And you realize that, to your question, we don't want to hear from the leaders bragging about how awesome and robust our infrastructure is. We want to hear from the leaders talking about where they're leading us. And we don't want them to lead us to the promised land of profit. We want that to be a part of who we are, but it can't be the everything that we are. And that's why we want them leading us to the destination of change and purpose.
Excellent. Nice weaving in of my words there. Do you think that it would have been that huge of an experience at CES that all these brands would be standing up for something now and saying that we need to take this stand if we haven't had COVID, if we hadn't had the civil unrest and all of the things that we experienced in the last year? Or did you see a trend already?
Yeah, you're so right. Everything got shifted forward. As I was suggesting earlier, 1 out of 10 clients used to come to us asking for this, and we'd have to push the other 9 out of 10 to do this. Their employees are demanding it. Their audiences are demanding it. And in a terrible year, a destructive year. Locally, we had fires. Internationally, we had the virus. We've got imminent wars. I mean, there's just all these really uncomfortable things. The last thing we want to hear from a corporation is, we got bigger. We made more money this year. And maybe as a shareholder, we kind of like it in the background, but in our livelihood and our social discourse, that stuff makes us feel uncomfortable. And so, yes, there has been an awakening. In fact, to cover, I got a question the other day, which is, Sasha, what are the 3 most important things that are happening in branding right now? And one, we talked about employer branding. Because all the talent is remote, the employer has to reach out and engage on a deeper level. And 2, if you're not doing CSR, you're not in business. You're not participating, because every one of us is expecting each of the brands that we choose to do something for the world beyond profit. And often it is why people pride themselves on their brand choice. They actually describe the product based on what it does for the world. I'll give you a fun example. I bought a new pair of shoes. So this is unscripted here. I'm just telling you this off the cuff. Growing up on Navy bases and in Southern California, punk rock and skateboarding was just a part of our culture. So yeah, so you get it. And so like skateboard shoes all day and all night, And so anyway, I looked into buying a new pair of skateboard shoes, and I found a new skateboard shoe company whose entire value proposition is the materials are non-toxic, the rubber is free market, all of this. And in fact, I'll show you the box.
Show me.
It's like this beautiful green box.
Wow.
And oh my gosh, good looking, crazy comfy, consciously made. We're here to show you a good time. And all of the commentary and messaging is all about the good that they do for the world. It's just amazing.
Awesome.
And the tags, I'll have to find them for you, but all the tags are about their environmental consciousness, their protection of labor wages. It's like, but does this shoe work for skateboarding? Oh, we don't even need to talk about that, right?
Right, exactly.
Okay, so that's the point, is it elevates the dialogue so beyond features and functions that I'm not asking, what's the price of this shoe compared to the shoe I used to skate in? I'm like, I want to wear a pair of shoes that makes me feel good every day. All right, well, knowing that I'm not polluting the planet with every step I take feels pretty damn good. And that creates a brand preference, and one that I'm here talking about.
I know, which is so awesome, because I remember years ago, I worked for several brands that had already been doing this before it was really a popular thing. And I remember specifically back then, even 10, 15 years ago, all the research was the psychographic of the person who's going to buy conscious consumer is they're going to look at 2 things on the shelf. And if they're almost identical in every spec, they're going to pick the one that's doing something good for the world, because they're going to feel empowered.
Totally.
As a consumer, right?
Yes. And that empowerment of choice, that empowerment of pride, that we've known this. I mean, we as marketers, you and I have been around a long time. We've known this, but getting executives to buy in on it, getting the board to be like, yes, spend money on that, to get HR to believe that that's actually the first thing that you want to talk to new talent about, that's taken a lot of fight. Yeah.
And I think this is interesting too. Let's talk a little bit about that very first thing you touched on, being almost like an empath and a believer, and feeling that believing of buying into something. That's where the emotional buy-in comes in, right? So if all this time has been happening and most of the people have been saying, we know this, we know this, we know this, it took a global devastation for these leaders to actually have an emotional connection to doing good, because it impacted them directly, right?
that is exactly the case, is that it took personal trauma to get them to wake up. And so their family, their neighbors, their friends, their community, all of us, none of us are free from this trauma. We are all having the same suffering experience. We've all been on lockdown, no matter where we are on the planet. We all can't travel and see friends. I mean, so finally it's shaken the leadership to the point where they realize that care has to be at the top of what we do.
Do you think it's here to stay, or do you think humans have a tendency to forget sometimes and there'll be a shift later?
I think we're going to have a summer of love where everyone's like, oh, we're free and we've got stimulus. And so everyone's going to kind of be carefree in their buying behavior. But once we level out and realize the economy is broken forever and we have a lot of work to do to lift everyone up, I think we're going to start to see a demand where employees and customers make their decision based on the organization's good actions, less about comp, less about other things. And to that degree, as I just mentioned earlier, we are not going to want to hear about your fancy new television. I understand you're making more money and you're making more products, but you have to help me understand what good comes from this. Otherwise, I'm just spending and creating waste. And we're all blatantly aware of it. Social media reminds us of it, of all the bad things that social media does. It also holds up a mirror to the world. And what is that mirror? It's trash everywhere. It's gluttonous consumption. It's single-use food packaging. I mean, every time I squeeze my toothpaste, I feel like I'm just like, why didn't I choose something more sustainable? Right. And so what is happening? I'm making choices. I'm choosing the ones that have a process, a policy that fits within the way that I want to function in the world. And I'm not some grand hippie. I'm just some person trying to feel good about my daily living. Right. And imagine how the world is awakening to this truth, no matter where we sit and live.
Right. And let's talk about that for a second, too, before we kind of get into some of the questions I want to ask you about your challenges and things that you've had getting through this, incredible business that you've built. Let's talk about that for a second in terms of the choices that we make, because I think one of the things that has happened in the cause world and the social responsibility world is if you're not doing it 100%, you're not genuine, you're not living up to the ethos, whatever. But the truth is that you can't necessarily do it all. And we have to learn how to adopt behaviors as we go and accept that we're taking a stand and we're stepping forward. Don't you agree?
I so agree. I help all of our clients see that this is a long game tactic. This is not a short-term revenue action. This is long-term, and it takes time to get this right. As I said earlier, if you give away what you do best, it means that you can already start doing CSR tomorrow. But getting it right, the right amount, the right cadence, the right timing, the right talent, that of course takes practice. And so that's why this is a sort of a long play initiative. We help our clients set goals and milestones. So for example, one of the major milestones is, can you publish thought leadership on your CSR, where you're actually teaching your competitors to do what you have done?
Oh, that's great. That's a great idea.
It's amazing. And you can imagine the pride that it instills when you find out that your competitor is also choosing to do this and they learn from watching you. That's something that your employees can never unsee. They'll remember that forever.
I agree with you. I think that there's empowerment and collaboration for sure, instead of what's mine is mine, Yeah. Oh, yeah. And that, I think the last thing about that point is just letting people feel like that they can have a level of acceptance, both from the brand side and the consumer side. Because if you are stepping into purpose in your brand, in your life, et cetera, we don't vilify people for just, you've got to take that first step and know it's okay. And for the consumers to help, I'm sure in your messaging, what you do is you help a brand say, hey, we don't have it all figured out yet, but we're doing it.
Oh, yeah. And what's crazy is that I try to tell the client, don't make this about politics. Okay? Don't make this about religion. Only make this about what you do professionally and how that service can benefit nonprofits. So for example, with our organization, we've served multiple competing religions. We've served multiple competing nonprofits, because we're not here to choose the nonprofit and tell it it's good or not. We're here to help that nonprofit communicate to the world why it matters and affect people. And so that's what's been so blessed. Again, is if you use your core competency to help drive nonprofits to success, you can feel damn good every day. You're going to have a whole diverse portfolio of CSR actions so you don't get tired or bored, and eventually get to a place where people just have like a humbling moment where they're like, oh, you guys, I really like you guys do that thing. And it's so damn sticky. It's so damn sticky. It can never be unseen.
Yeah, I agree with you. And it's unfortunate, like you said, with social media, that we can find one little thing not to like and it can go viral and ruin something when there's so much good being done in the world too. So hopefully we can breed a level of acceptance in the world and letting people know that, hey man, we are really all in this together. It's such a cliche, but we are, and we're all doing our best.
And that's the counter to cancel culture. Cancel culture works when you've got nothing good to save, when you only are taking. But when you're giving, there's forgiveness. The coworkers and the community will stand up and speak out on your behalf. That way you don't have to be the one making the comments in the chat.
Right.
They are.
Right.
And that's the only way to power down that power.
Right. And then final words on that too, being open to hearing other people's viewpoints so that we can do better along the way. To
tell you the truth, it's so evident that those counter conversations, those folks speaking out, can actually be good for business. It gets all of your audiences inflamed and engaged and protective and defensive. And when they have those emotional experiences and feelings, it sticks. And so they're even more proud and more determined to keep doing the work, A good example is Patagonia, as you mentioned earlier, has a whole bunch of really innovative programs. I mean, just some best in class stuff, from how they treat employees and how they think about vacation to the materials they source. The ad that you mentioned, don't buy this jacket. It's like, wow, like they're telling you, if you've got one from us already, it's not worn out, don't buy a new one.
Right.
But one of the things that was so interesting is that a lot of people in the fintech sector started wearing Patagonia vests. So you probably recognize them. They're kind of fuzzy and they say Patagonia. And so what was interesting was that a lot of those fintech innovators were doing destructive things to general society. They were taking advantage and using manipulative tactics to kind of get people to invest or take financial action. I don't need to get into it, other than, what did Patagonia and its workforce stand up and say? All right, even though we're the darling of Silicon Valley and everyone's wearing our vests, we're not going to sell vests to you anymore.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yes.
Really?
So they've actually taken social action, that they no longer like the way that some of these Silicon Valley fintech businesses are behaving. And so they're not going to allow them to buy thousands of units for their workforce anymore, because Patagonia doesn't want to be associated with that behavior.
Wow.
Okay, well, what did that do to revenue? Oh, revenue tank. Shareholders are like, that's not in our best interests. But how about the workforce at Patagonia? Like, can you imagine? Where they're like, yes. How about the customer who's like, yes, all right, well, how can you, what is the price of that advocacy? I cannot put a dollar value on it.
Yeah, you definitely can. I mean, that's powerful. They've proven that time and time again. And I'll just give a quick shout out, talking about the emergence of early cause to now. You may or may not know this, but I was involved with the kind of the beginning stages of 1% for the Planet with Yvonne Chouinard. And my late husband passed away years ago. And I brought his parents to hear the first pitch of 1% for the Planet from Yvonne. And our family winery was one of the first 10 businesses to sign up back in 2002, committing 1% of your gross to the planet. Yeah. And so that's like legacy leadership from then to where not many people were doing it. And Patagonia was taking these kinds of stands, activism, not just sustainability, not just CSR, but all the way to now, this shift of like a massive insurgence of, we better stand up for impact and purpose and social responsibility, which is really cool to see.
It's amazing that you and I get to see this swing in our career, right? Smack in the middle of our, the last 20 years, we were able to watch it transform. Yeah. And honestly, it's kind of what's exciting me right now, is like, I've been working so hard to get people to understand this. In fact, this is a perfect example. So you mentioned how I teach in some graduate school programs. And one of the programs that I teach in is for this business school in Europe. And they're very meticulous about the courses that they want to take in the United States. I mean, they're really specific because this is expensive for them. It's not the same type of graduate students culture in Europe. The idea of like you getting an MBA, it's like very American in its behavior. So they're spending all this time and money taking these classes in America. And so what was crazy is that traditionally when I prepared curricula for them, it was as like dogmatic and meticulous as you could possibly imagine. I mean, it was like almost German in its dictation, But fortunately, this year, what did they want 1/5 of the curriculum to be about? CSR.
Wow.
Can you believe it?
Cool.
Like, we're going to put aside corporate finance. We're going to put aside HR policy, and we're going to be like, no, we have to talk about this.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's a sign. It's like, all right, it has arrived. It is here. It's in the curriculum. And I think that means it's going to be a part of the mental state of business leaders going forward.
I think so too. And I am so happy to see that, because I think it really will change the world, and it'll create all these thought leaders. Your children will be watching these brands stand for something, and it's going to influence how they live their lives and how they become change makers. Don't you think?
Yeah, exactly what I'm hoping for and working on.
Cool. Well, I mean, that's all such awesome information about, your backstory and like what you're doing at Innovation Protocol. I hope that if anyone has any rebranding work, they reach out to you, because you really get this. Not that there aren't other agencies that do too, but I'm a little bit biased, but I know you really get this and you live and breathe it. And so I'm hoping that people will see you, hear you, want to know more about you. Definitely watch your speeches, but I want to talk a little bit more about your personal journey now. We know as entrepreneurs that doing anything entrepreneurial, doing anything in life can be challenging, period. But when you try to weave purpose into it, it can be even more difficult. And so what are some of the challenges that you had when you started Innovation Protocol? I mean, you've been going at it for a while, so that's great. You're past the 5-year hump of a business failing or succeeding. But I'd love to understand not just the mechanics of the challenges that you had, like money and those kinds of things, but what were some of the emotional things you needed to navigate? What did you do to help keep you on that path for people who might feel like, ugh, this is so hard. Like, can I do this?
When I was working for other firms, I worked my butt off and I was the highest performer. But I used to get in trouble a lot. It's probably the theme of my life. I used to get in trouble a lot because I would do volunteer work. I would go do branding work as a volunteer, like for community organizations and such. And so when my bosses found out that I was doing it, their natural inclination was, wait a minute, that's brand strategy time. You should be selling. It's not stuff that you should be giving away. And so then I would argue, well, I'm only making so much right now. I can't necessarily just give away money. I've got to give away my time, my highest valued asset. And so I always got like the stink eye. I always got the kind of like, all right, Strauss. And so eventually, my first spouse and I were talking about this at the time, and the person said, like, Sasha, if you believe that brand strategy and doing good for the world can hang out, then you're going to go be alone on an island, but I'll love you. I'll love you. Go be alone on an island. And I was like, okay, I'm going to go be alone on an island. I'm going to be an independent consultant, and the work that I do is going to have this embedded in it. And so when I was building out my business plan, I kind of shopped it around to my peers and mentors. And I was like, so listen, these are the faces of brand strategy, et cetera. But I just want you to know, 10% of our services are going to be given to nonprofits. And anyone who's been in business knows, if you make 17% profit, 20% profit, like that's your money, right? Mm-hmm. And so what did everybody, they laughed at me. They basically said, have fun with that hippie cause, Sasha. It's not going to work. You're going to be break even as a business. And so I took that as a sign from the creation force in the universe that you got to go do this, Strauss. You have got to go do this and show that it works. Mm-hmm. And so to answer your question, like, how was I able to build this business? I was able to do this business because I was pushing back. Mm-hmm. I was pushing back against behaviors that disgusted me, that made me feel like everyone was self-centered and focused only on their little world. And so by having that fuel every day, being like, no, we can teach employees. No, we can care about our ex-employees and want them to do well. No, we can help clients not buy services from us. Mm-hmm. And make enough money to live. And make enough money to inspire people to not get my talent poached from competitors who've got more money,
Right, sure.
And so what I was basically pushing up against was the idea that the only way to thrive in the communications business is to be greedy. And here I've been able to endure 2 huge economic upheavals, COVID, talent coming and going, all the things that are part of just running a business in this era. And I'm proud to say the business is as strong as it's ever been. It's got more engaged talent than it's ever had. It's got a strong reputation, a durable reputation. And my coworkers and I are teaching in 8 different graduate programs concurrently. So it just shows you that this dialogue has not only been approved, but it's a now fundamental. And I'm so happy to say that it took me 15 years to fight the fight, but it was worth every single duel.
Wow. Thank you, Sasha, for sharing that. That's so powerful. I mean, really, that's a sign of even when things get difficult. And I know some things were not easy for you. You know, you were rejected from universities in your life, you said, which I find shocking. You had zero funding at one point. Like you had some serious uphill battles, and you're still here. And that's great.
I was humble while it happened. I spent, I went from having a marquee salary to barely being able to pay rent, getting my buddy to give me a back unit in his condo, and just sitting there and working and building this business. And so all those things are just part of the struggle of entrepreneurship. I don't particularly get upset about them, but I just say that was part of earning your stripes. Mm-hmm. And to that end, I've made sure that no one else goes through the same daunting process that I did in starting my business. So when I give classes to entrepreneurs, I help them take my 15-year business timeline and execute it in 2 years.
Wow.
Because I learned so much from all of that upheaval, from trials and tribulations. And for example, one of my biggest issues is overloving employees, caring about them. It's truly a business problem. Caring about them so much that even when they're floundering, still celebrating them. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, if you're a career-driven person who wants to advance, your partner, advisor, mentor, boss has to help nurture you when you're not performing too. Mm-hmm. And so I've had to learn this, and now I'm good at it. But it took me a long time to be able to sit down with someone and say, I love you for this, and your outcomes are fantastic, but there's this thing in the middle that we have to work on. Now I'm telling you, what do all 24 of my coworkers want to talk about? They don't want to talk about this. They don't want to talk about that. They want to talk about the thing that they have to work on. And so I've come full circle. I went from protecting them now to enabling them. And that's something I learned in entrepreneurship, and something I try to imbue in all of the entrepreneurs I serve.
That's great. I'm so happy you said that. I'm in a partnership of 7 partners, and we all call it the pile of puppies. But at the same time, when we need to get tough, we can do that. And so that's just part of learning that as you go. You can have a happy and productive environment at the same time. Sasha Strauss, you are my hero. I have one last question for you. What's your favorite activity when you're feeling stressed?
Learning. Learning to awaken the mind and be spatially aware, and it's the only thing that lets it go. I definitely take my dog for a walk. I definitely hug my kids. I eat, but I only am cured when I learn.
Very cool. Well, thank you for sharing that. Thank you, Sasha, for being here today. You've given so much great information. It's been fun.
You are a special person, and I'm so honored to be on this receiving end of your questions. I'll add that learning that I mentioned comes from people like you, where I'm dialing into podcasts and webinars from people like you, opening my mind, helping me see things in new ways. And that's what gets me up on the down days. So thank you for what you do.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate that. It means a lot coming from you. Maybe I'll hire you for my rebrand at some point. I am so thrilled to have you here. Everyone, please. Before we go, you got to tell people where they can find you. They'll be on the website too, on A World on Purpose, etc. But I like you to say it.
Go to aworldonpurpose.com, and along the other folks that have been guests, there probably will be contact information for me and my organization.
I love it. Thank you for that. That's great. I should probably just do that from now on instead. Thank you so much, Sasha, for being here. Innovation Protocol, seeing all of you and my friends in LA, having moved to Northern California, but I'm going to come down and visit you soon.
Please do a hike. Thank you for making time to include me in this.
You're welcome. And everyone, thank you so much for tuning into A World on Purpose, where we teach people how to seek their purpose, find their purpose, live their purpose, all with passion. And to Sasha's point, and my company does this too, from a branding perspective, you really can do better by doing more good And if you want to learn how to do it, you can contact Sasha through worldonpurpose.com. He's amazing. Please go and watch all of his TED Talks and all of his speeches. You will absolutely be blown away. He's shaking his head at me, but it's true. And I am your host, Alyssa Fisher Harris. Thank you for coming back every week, and we will see you soon. Thank you for taking this journey into a world on purpose with our incredible guests. To learn more about our amazing guests and their inspiring purpose-driven work, please go to aworldonpurpose.com. Don't forget to look at our call to action of the week to mobilize your desire for purpose into action. A World on Purpose can be found on Apple Podcasts and all the major podcast platforms, and the video version can be found on YouTube. If what you heard today inspires you, please write a review and like and share on the platform of your choice. We'd love to also hear from you and learn your pivot to purpose and the meaningful work that you do that lifts humanity. Send your stories to info@aworldonpurpose.com. I'd like to thank our World on Purpose team for making this show a reality. Once again, I'm your host, Alyssa Fisher Harris. Thank you for tuning in to A World on Purpose. I look forward to seeing you soon.